Hey, everybody. We have Patrick Macqueen in the house once again. Patrick, for those of you that don't know, he is a real estate attorney here in Arizona and gives us his time every now and then to talk about topics that are on people's minds. Patrick, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So being in Arizona, there's this little bug that can just wreak havoc. I don't even know if it's a bug, insect. I'm not even sure exactly what it is, but you know what? I know it can wreak havoc. And I think it's important to kind of talk about because there are pockets of Arizona where scorpions are more dominant than others. And Arizona's a desert, so you would think, well, they're equally distributed, and that's just not the case. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about what the disclosure requirements are, kind of what you see, if you've had any cases around this, and let's just dive into it, because whether you're listing a house or whether you're buying a house, there's some things that you'll want to think about, especially in an area that might be more, I guess, dominated by scorpions. And how do you even know that?
Yeah.
If you know they're from Ohio, how do you know? Because we're in a desert. You would think scorpions are everywhere. Well, they kind of are, but there are areas around, the Phoenix metro area, etc., that have had these little pockets. So, tell me everything you know about scorpions and real estate disclosure. Okay.
Well, under Arizona law, you have to disclose anything material to a real estate transaction. As a seller, you have an obligation to disclose material facts about the property that you're selling. And there's a statute that says that. It's a consumer fraud statute. We also have case law. We have all sorts of stuff that says you've got to disclose material facts about a property. Okay. And I'm using a little bit of a shorthand version of what the disclosure obligation is, but basically it's anything material to a transaction. Even if it's not material to you, it could be material to somebody else. And so to me, the obligation is, if you think that there's any chance that somebody may not like the fact that you're going to talk about this, then you need to disclose it, right? So, one of the things that comes up that I find fairly funny is I'll talk to, let's say, 100 real estate agents and teaching classes, or just talking to a group of 100 real estate agents out of 100 real estate agents, and I say, well, what's the most common reason, or do people really cancel after they get a SPUDS, the seller property disclosure statement? And the answer is no. People don't normally cancel after the receipt of a seller property disclosure statement, the SPUDS, right? As a buyer, you get all this information about the property. Let's say that there was a bad sewer backup. Let's say that there's a noisy neighbor that was disclosed. Let's say that that there's airplanes that go by, or a train that goes by at night, in the middle of the night. Those don't freak people out. For whatever reason, it could have been a hoarder's house. They don't care about that stuff. Whenever there's a scorpion disclosure, though, people's eyes perk up. And out of that 100 or so real estate agents that I mentioned, the hypothetical 100, I see people, I've had, they'll raise their hand and say, I've had people cancel when they see that there's scorpions checked on the box on the seller property disclosure statement, because that's unacceptable to me. And I say that's funny because it's like, well, got news for you. They're everywhere.
We are in the desert.
Yeah, they're literally everywhere. I mean, I've seen them in houses or I've heard of them in houses that were very centrally located. They don't get a lot of water. They don't have a lot of rocks. And then, of course, you go out into the rockier areas and they're everywhere. And it's interesting because you're 100% correct. Parts of Chandler, you're like, Central Chandler, they got scorpion issues. Yes, they have infestation issues. There's not to knock Chandler, but they're everywhere. I mean, Gilbert, Mesa, there's just different pockets where these things are. And going back to that anecdote, though, we don't cancel contracts based on a SPUDS disclosure, a seller property disclosure of something that most people think is horrific. We cancel them for these insects that are literally everywhere. So whatever reason, scorpions are the thing that you want to avoid here in Arizona, I guess. But you have to disclose them. If you've seen one, you've got to disclose it. Even if you thought it was a minor incident, you only saw one or two during a 10-year span, yes, that's minor in my mind, but you got to disclose it.
I think that's the key, exactly what you said. And that is if you've seen one, you've seen 100, like you have to disclose it. So if you've seen one in 10 years or 20 years or 10 or whatever it is, it's protecting you to disclose it and make a note of it. I mean, again, the real estate agent, buyer's agent, selling agent, if it's somebody new to the Valley or new to Arizona, they're going to talk a little bit about the desert, the climate, the types of bugs or critters that we have here. But it is something that we all, understand. But I think that if I was going to sell my house, I would be saying, in the time I've lived here, here's an estimate of how many scorpions I've seen. That's different than infestation, where some of these pockets, it's not even, it's crazy. And so, I mean, but you're saying there really is no difference. Like just disclose it. And obviously if it's infestation, it's absolutely something that you should probably dig into, address. Has the house been treated? What do you know? That kind of thing. Do you feel like there's any difference in the approach, or it's just period?
Yeah, no, I do think there's a little bit of a difference in approach, because what I've seen people get themselves into trouble when they just say, hey, I've seen a insignificant amount of scorpions, when it's truly been an infestation. There is that situation happening. So you can't just sort of, speckle out and provide small amounts of information to try to lead somebody off the track. If there's been an infestation, then you need to say scorpion infestation treated such and such a date. I haven't seen any since this was treated 2 years ago. And so as long as you're doing that disclosure. So the people who get themselves into trouble on disclosures in general are those that either don't disclose something and it's incredibly obvious, or maybe not incredibly obvious, but obvious after the person takes over that, yes, there was a problem here and you didn't disclose anything, or that provide just these little nuggets to kind of try to lead you off the path, so you don't investigate it further, and then you run into the situation where there was an infestation. So I think being as honest and open as possible as a seller is key. If you've had that infestation, which some neighborhoods have, indicate that. Others in the neighborhood have had the same thing, that sort of stuff. I think that's perfectly fine. And it does protect you, because if you're disclosing that you've only seen 2 a year or an insignificant amount, well, insignificant to who? I think you need to make sure you're providing a very accurate disclosure.
Yeah. What if, just by chance, what if the real estate agent comments and said, oh, a couple in 20 years, not a big deal. You're going to skip over that. Like, walk through that, because that may happen. It may not happen, but it may happen. So
yeah, I think that real estate agents need to be very, very careful in many circumstances when it comes to disclosure, and hand them the spuds, hand them the disclosure statement, and say, look, if you have any questions, let me know. But I'm not going to be the one who makes the determination whether A, you disclose this or not, and B, the extent of the disclosure. I think you need to disclose this. I think you need to be as open and honest about what your experience has been. But I can't write the disclosure for you. I'm not going to say yes or no to a particular disclosure, because then that gets the agent involved in a potential misrepresentation lawsuit as well. And, if the seller is not disclosing something that's pretty bad, like a major scorpion infestation, the agent themselves may have a separate obligation under their ethical obligations to kind of disclose it as well. And so, you don't really want to mess with that too much. And so as an agent, the advice should be disclose what you've experienced. If it's bad, then we'll work around it.
Other than scorpions, what are other kind of common things that are not necessarily disclosed in the seller statement?
I've had some really rough ones that where there were hoarding situations, animals not making it, that sort of stuff that wasn't disclosed, and those are probably the worst ones, the hoarding ones, because you find out from the neighbors, you kind of get smells from the ventilation, Fortunately, I haven't been in any of those houses. I've just seen pictures. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know how you describe that one. But the hoarding ones are the really the most difficult ones, because people can do a good job of covering that up. And there's really nothing to necessarily tip off a prospective buyer. There's nothing recorded in the real property records by the city or the county that there's been some sort of condemnation here or whatever, or there's been a hoarding situation. And so you can find out the hard way from neighbors. Oh, I'm so glad that somebody bought this. That was such a horrible situation. And then you're like, what are we talking about here? So yeah, those are the tough ones. The hoarding ones, I would say, that are the tough ones. In terms of other disclosures, roofing issues, bathroom leaks, those types of things. Some people forget. I that happens. I would presume, but the common ones are roof leaks. The common ones are slab leaks, pool leaks, those types of things that just don't get either remembered or disclosed.
Okay. So disclosure important. I'm just curious, what percentage of your cases have disclosure misrepresentation in them? I gotta think that's a lot of what you do is like disclosure or arguments between, people post closing of the real estate. I mean, I'm just guesstimating, but
I would say, I don't know in terms of percentage of practice. It's probably 10%, something 5 to 10%.
Really? So it's not a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal, but it's not it's not. We try not to exploit that practice area because it's unfortunate many times, and so we'll take on the big ugly ones, and then we try to push people towards mediation on the smaller ones, just so that people can move on with their lives. But I would say that in the 20 or so years that I've been practicing, between 225 to 250 cases where that's a lot, where we've represented either a buyer or a seller or a real estate agent in one of those in a non-disclosure situation. So whether it's a demand letter, whether it's representing somebody in mediation, whether it's actually going all the way to trial. I remember one of my first trials was on a scorpion disclosure, and it was occasional we get it, and everybody knew. The pest control guy came in and goes, oh yeah, this area gets them hit hard, and it's like, well, and we were on the defense side, so not a good situation. But I would say between 225 and 250 over the years, and that's a lot.
That is a lot. So you said 10%. I'm thinking not big, but I mean 250. That's a lot of cases. And again, you're not talking trial. You're just talking at whatever part of the process where you have to engage. What about a situation, and we see this, where maybe it was the owner has passed away, and maybe the beneficiary or a trust is liquidating the property and they don't have any knowledge, or maybe it's an investor that hasn't lived at the property. Like, what do you do in that situation? Because many of those times the SPUS just indicates, look, the seller hasn't lived in the property and doesn't have knowledge. Then what?
And that happens, it certainly happens. But I think that even as you inherited it from grandma, and you changed the light bulb when you were 14. I mean, that. So you've been in the property many times as grandson of grandma who recently passed away. So you can disclose something. Sometimes we come in and we get investors who come in and we'll do a fix and flip. They can disclose something. They've redone everything, right? Or a lot of this. And so in those situations, for somebody to say, we're not going to provide a SPUDS because we don't know anything. No, to me, you provide a SPUDS and just say, I just don't know. I don't know if this happened or not. I've never lived here. And you do the explanation. But there are certain things, the address, the approximate year it was built, that type of, since you've owned it, those types of things that are basic sort of parameters in the seller property disclosure statement. So to me, you disclose everything or could possibly know. And well, the standard isn't could possibly know, but to me, you want to be as expansive and and all encompassing as possible. So, I'll tell you this: when I first sold one of my houses, the question on the SPUDs was, are you aware of any easements that affect the property? And for most people, that means, well, did I grant my neighbor an easement to cut across my property? Did I, does my property lead to a trail that goes to another easement that goes to a river or something? No, the answer to that is no. But that's what most people think. Well, guess what? My property has easements all over through it. APS has an easement they can walk into my front yard and change my meter. There's all sorts of easements that affect my CC&Rs provide easements to my HOA. So for me to check the box that said I'm not aware of any easements, yeah, I am aware of easements. And so a lot of people are missing that one, but they just don't think about it in the same way I guess I do, perhaps. But yeah, you can literally check off a lot of boxes that you didn't once you kind of expand on thinking about that, and you should check off as many boxes as a seller as you possibly can, because that document usually does not dissuade a buyer, and it only serves to protect you.
I love that. That's great advice as we wrap up. So again, just if you're selling a property, just making sure that you're just spending a little time on the seller disclosure statement. Certainly ask questions to your real estate attorney or your real estate agent, and just make sure that you know what you're doing as far as true representation, because you don't want to withhold something that could bite you in the buns downstream.
That's right. Totally.
All right. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate you. I'll see you soon.
Thank you.